Wrestling fans, this April in Jacksonville, Florida, the Spartan Combat Nationals are returning. Wrestle a different style each day, April 8th through the 10th, 2022, at the Spartan Combat Nationals. Register now at SpartanCombat.com. Now let's get to the show.
My whole life, I followed Beat the Streets from afar, just, coming from the wrestling world, knowing what the mission and soul of the organization is, using the sport of wrestling to positively alter life's trajectory for youth that need us.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestled, because if you wrestled, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
If I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if it gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
It's Wrestling Changed My Life. This is your host, Ryan Warner. Welcome back to the show. Our guest today is Ben Reiter. Ben is the executive director for Beat the Streets National. Before that, he lived in Peru for 10 years, where he was a professional MMA fighter and a local Peruvian legend, folks. We get into it on the show. This guy has had an incredible journey, and I can't wait for you to hear it. Fan of the week goes to... Who do we got? Our friend Chase Pammy, a longtime listener of the show, owner of Gold Rush Wrestling. Chase was a 2-time D1 All-American back in the day. Chase, thank you so much for the love, my friend. We appreciate it. And that's it, folks. Let's give it up for the great Ben Reiter. Peace! Ben Reiter, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. It's really an honor and grateful to be here.
Really excited. Let's start in Peru. Is it true that some of your early fights in the cage, in the octagon, used to take place inside like chicken cockfighting rings? Can you confirm or deny that story?
Okay, yeah, that's a true story. Yeah, that's
how did
that's
that
a true
happen?
story. It's it's not like that's what it was used for at that moment, but it was they set up. I feel like, I guess my MMA career, I feel like as I started in South America, I kind of got the experience as if I was starting out maybe 10 or 15 years earlier in the States.
Yeah.
So I've been to, like, I've done a couple Grand Prix, like multiple fights in a day. And yeah, one of the places that I would compete in, some of my early fights were during another day of the week. There were cockfights going on there, and then on a weekend there was MMA fights going on there. and yeah, there was warm up areas next to you see it was all cleared out, but you see where you see the warm up areas were next to the like where the rooster cages and everything like that. So you definitely feel the presence. But I don't know, at that time, I mean, you're just like, you're so focused on what you're about to do that it doesn't really matter where you are. But they would fill out lots of support, lots of people. And honestly, with that, like, I just want to always make sure I've never felt anything but support and love from all the people in Peru. And it was a really great place to start my MMA career, and built a real sense of family down there. I met my wife, started my family there. Both my kids were born there. But yeah, definitely got some old school stories in the MMA world for sure, through that experience. Raleigh did it too, man. I think you had Raleigh on here. He had wait a second. No, actually, I don't know if he did compete in that in the Rosedale. He might have had one there.
We love Raleigh on this show. He's a friend of the show. He had a tremendous impact on the final stages of Slaying Saitiev, and he's a great connector of people. He's an amazing guy.
Oh, he's awesome. Have you read his book?
Not all the way through. I did read it on Kindle, getting ready to interview him, but not all the way through. You're a saintly figure in the book, though.
Oh man, I know. Yeah, I'll owe him thanks for life on that one. But yeah, I know. I was just kind of, we shared that book. Which definitely was mostly during the time that we were living together in Peru. So I feel forever grateful to him that he kind of captured that year. And it's on paper and published, and it was, he did an amazing job with that. And it was really, really cool that he kind of, told his own story and told all of our stories through that process.
Yeah, no, that it's such a cool experience that you guys all went down there. I know you were there first, and we're going to get into all of the fighting in Peru and what you're doing now with Beat the Streets. But just to start, how did you end up in Peru to begin with after you graduated Penn?
So I graduated Penn in 2009, and at that point I just kind of felt a need to, I wanted to give back to the world and do some sort of volunteer trip, do something and I also wanted to get that experience of being in another country and, learn a different language and culture. And so I was looking at opportunities to do that. And that's where I came across Peru. Is a little bit like I knew I wanted to be in a Spanish speaking country because I took Spanish in high school and a little bit in college, but didn't speak it at all. So I'm like, okay, let's figure this one out. And I just wanted to do something where I'm on the ground level and doing some good in the world. And I figured that was there's only so many chapters in life that you can go and do that and kind of uproot. So it felt like the right timing and moment. And so that was kind of my thinking behind it. I was just going to be in Peru for a year and then come back and, start that next chapter of life. But I ended up really getting just integrating the community. And like I said before, I met my wife there, and both my kids were born there, and, a year turned into over 7, almost 8. So it was, stayed there for a while. And now it's like a second home too. Every time we go back, and we get lots of, just love it there. Lots of love from the Peruvian, our Peruvian family.
And so once you decided, like, Peru got on your radar, had you already graduated before you committed, or when you graduated, you knew you were moving to Peru?
It was shortly. I already graduated, but it was like right after.
Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty shortly after.
And when you moved out there, did you go to like Lima, a city of millions, or were you really in the outskirts of it?
I was in Arequipa, which is now a lot more modernized. But when I was there, I left for that trip in 2009, almost 2010, and so the city looked a lot different at that point. But I was working, so I was living in Arequipa, which there is 1 million people there.
Wow.
But we were working on the outskirts of the city, which are much more rural. They're in these towns called los pueblos jóvenes, which is basically, it just means young towns in English. But what you have there, you have kind of like new populations coming from the Andes, coming from very rural areas of Peru, and they're getting close to a city to try to find some work because that's where the economy is. But there's no infrastructure there yet, so there's this almost kind of like there's this whole setup phase that needs to happen, and it takes a while to get running water or electricity, and it takes a while to get a school set up or a health clinic or all these kind of basic needs things that kind of there's this transition phase that's very really rough on people. So those are the areas that we were working in and providing some additional support, and I was involved in projects to help build a community center and get a library going and do like after school activities. And we did all sorts of stuff. We partnered with the Rotary Club and there was a couple of pediatricians there in that club. We got doctors out there, and We did campaigns to bring, then we went even further up. We did campaigns to get warm clothing and blankets up to families in the Andes Mountains, like 17,000 feet altitude, where they were really struggling during the winter. So yeah, those are some of the things that I was involved in Peru, and in parallel, competing as a MMA fighter.
I'm so glad you brought up the folks living in the Andes, because I'm fascinated by Dagestan, for example, right? These people live up in the mountains. They're incredibly tough. It's remote. And I didn't really think about the Andes in that way. But once I heard that you were, as you mentioned, going up to 17,000 foot where people live, and it's so cold in the winter that they can't keep warm. I mean, what kind of folks live up there? Is there electricity? Is there running water? I mean, what is it like up there?
No, not running water. There wasn't running water even closer to the city where when I was working in the outskirts of Arequipa. Like some of the basic needs kind of thing, like you might spend half a day getting the water you need for your family, because you got to go walk up, you got to go like walk up a mountain to the closest well, and then fill up a few buckets and walk back down to your home. And it's even more so the more rural you get, the farther you got to go, kind of thing. So yeah, no running water there. The families that do the best during the winter are the ones that have animals, and you bring in, you bring the alpaca in the house during the winter, and kind of keeps everyone warm. Yeah. That's how you
in the house.
Yeah, that's how you get through a winter there for sure. You got to bring it's. But what's going on there is mostly there's agriculture. There's lots of potato farmers, or different kind of. There's like over 2,000 different variants of potatoes in Peru. I believe there's an international seed bank in Peru for potatoes, because there's protecting all the different species or variants from there. And then chuños are like a cousin of that, like another root plant. So there's lots of farming there. Yeah, there's agriculture and livestock.
So you're out there doing the Lord's work, helping all these people. And as you mentioned, you're also training MMA. When you first went there, did you know you were going to train MMA?
Yeah, I knew. I was getting the itch in college a bit. And then I kind of, I remember, watching the UFC and thinking like, oh yeah, I think I can kind of be good at this. And then, so I was looking for a place to train. I trained some beforehand. And then when I got to Peru, I was, that was one of the things I was looking for, just a place where I could work on my skills and continue to grow as an athlete and learn new things.
So was it by happenstance that you ended up being coached by one of the great legends of Peru, or how did that link up?
So you're talking about Ivan Iberico?
Yeah.
That was, he ran the biggest event in Peru, one of the biggest in South America, on top of being this legendary coach, and really great friend. And also when we talk about, just like when we get into what Beat the Streets is all about, and the mission of really empowering youth and getting youth on a positive path through the sport, Ivan's done a lot of great work on that front, where I've seen him, I've worked with him to pull kids out of gangs, getting in knife fights and getting them on the mat, and changing their lives completely around. So it was the way that I connected with Ivan as I was training in Arequipa. Then when he had his event in Lima, and I was there as my first 2 amateur fights were in his event, and then he had like an amateur event and then a pro event. So I connected as when I went there to compete as an athlete, and then he went on to support me as a coach all the way through my career. And then as a friend, he actually came to visit us at our home. He was here a little bit outside of Philadelphia, him and his wife, not too long ago. So it was really cool to do that. That was awesome.
And for folks who don't know who he is, like, what's his stature and his history in the Peruvian fighting circles?
Well, he was the first guy to go. Well, I mean, I don't want to say that there were some really good. There were some amazing fighters coming out of Peru. I mean, you have the first guy the first Peruvian in the UFC was Tony de Souza, who was also a coach on the UFC, trained at BJ Penn's camp. What Iban did, Tony was also living in, he went to Cal Poly. He was living in America at that time too. But Iban never left the country at that time. And then he was going out he was the first guy to start beating all these Brazilians, and nobody in Peru thought that was kind of possible at that moment in MMA history. So he pushed the line on what you could do, and then he spread that message across the whole country. He helped Peruvian athletes believe in themselves and coach them on how to get there, and really, he has that mindset of just whoever names don't matter. There was a little bit of the mindset when he was coming up of just like, okay, Brazil is this MMA mecca and Peru's the neighbor there. So it was kind of tough for a Peruvian MMA fighter to think about, oh man, what are we going to do against these, just kind of overshadowed by Brazil. But he was aggressively trying to defeat that mindset and empower other athletes to believe in themselves and say like, yeah, you could be a world champion. And he did it as a fighter, and then as a coach, he's been getting Peruvian athletes from like their first day on the mat to the UFC at a really fast rate. And I mean, all of the current UFC fighters from Peru have been coached by Iban, and he's been really he's been doing amazing work on that front.
And so you meet him at this event, and he's like, you got to come train with me. And then you essentially moved to Lima.
Well, I would I'd go back and forth for a bit. And I would do some training camps there before each fight. But my wife's also from Lima. So at some point, my wife came and moved with me to Arequipa. And it was, my wife and I and our little daughter. But then eventually then after about 3 years in Arequipa, we moved to Lima full time. And that's where I was training full time with Iban. And I was doing that for the majority of my MMA career. And and then once I signed with Bellator, I'd be kind of training year round in Peru. And I would also I would do 8-week, 12-week training camps at Jackson Winks in Albuquerque and train with all these UFC legends there. I was sparring partners with John Jones and doing, training with all these, some of the world champions, best in the world. And, got in the train with Coach Jackson and Coach Winklejohn. So I would do that before each camp. And it was tough for me to find sparring partners in Peru, being an upper weight. So I would go out. That's what kind of nudged me to first make that move. So basically my rhythm was kind of, I'd be helping leading social impact efforts. I'd be training in Peru year round. And then before each major fight, I would do a camp in Albuquerque, train with the, amazing athletes that are there, get ready for a fight. I'd be, living in the gym 3 times a day, and then go compete and then come back home and, spend time with my family and get back to the normal rhythm.
That's amazing that you went up to Jackson Wink. And so how would you compare and contrast that training environment versus the one you had in Peru? Because you were training with a bunch of dudes who would go on to the UFC in Peru. Yeah.
They were really, they're getting it right. I think the big difference for me was just the amount of sparring partners that were my size was kind of where I needed to change there. But yeah, I'd say, really just all around amazing coaches on both fronts. And I'm so grateful for my experience, with my family and teammates in Peru and my coach Iban, and I'm so grateful for my experience with Coach Greg and Coach Wink and all of my teammates over at Jackson Winks. And I really kind of built another family there too. At one point I was thinking about moving there. Wow. And really good people. So overall, it kind of goes to that message. Like I always, when I reflect on my journey through combat sports and before that through wrestling, I always think of no matter where in the world, wherever I find a mat, I find a home, a community, a great group of people that it doesn't matter where you come from. At any, it's a lot of these locations, you got people coming from 20 different countries, all sorts of different backgrounds, might not feel like there's all that much in common, way different cultures. But you get on the mat and it's just this big connector, and you have that sense of just like, yeah, you're home. You know, everyone's just trying to help each other and help each other grow and get better. And there's that sense of support, that sense of family, sense of community. I think that's one of the things that is just really special about this sport. You know, it's really special about the sport of wrestling. And I continue to feel that feeling through combat sports. And it's something really special about what we do at Beat the Streets, because that when we're talking about just, you know, working with the youth that we work with across the country, and from some, you know, not everyone, but some are coming from some really tough situations, and we're in very underserved communities, and it's, you know, it's powerful for anyone, but I think it's part of what makes Beat the Street so impactful, that we're able to cultivate and grow that sense of community, sense of family that you find on the mat. Yeah,
it's cool. You've seen that even in countries where, like Peru, it's not really a wrestling stronghold, more of a lucha libre. And correct me if I'm wrong there, but even, you know, it's kind of like a grappling thing that bonds people.
100%. It's like you got to go through adversity together. You got to look after each other as team. It's like that culture is a bonding culture. There aren't that many sports where you could say, I mean, all my best friends from wrestling, like I keep in touch with all of them.
Yeah.
And there aren't that many sports where you see that. I think it's it's, you know, what's the special sauce there? I think it's like some of that experience you got to go through together. Really, you know, if you go through some adversity together, it brings, you know, you learn more about yourself and you grow closer to the people around you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens through our journeys on the mat.
And, you know, talking about Peru in a little bit more detail. So, you know, you mentioned Brazil, huge rivals, and I don't know if rivals is the best word, because there was such a level of awe to the Brazilians just from everything you've said and this interview and past interviews. But I found it interesting that, you know, jiu-jitsu is associated with Brazil, but in Peru, they were doing a form of no-gi kind of grappling. What was that called, and how does it compare to jiu-jitsu?
It's called luta livre, which is also from Brazil. There was a big rivalry between luta livre and jiu-jitsu within Brazil. And then the reason why luta livre is so popular in Peru is because that's what my coach Ivan was trained in, and he brought it to Peru, and he's the president of the National Federation for Luta Livre in Peru, and he's really kind of helped that grow. But it's no-gi submission grappling. At one point, there was much bigger differences between the techniques when it kind of first started. But now that there's no-gi jiu-jitsu, that was a big difference right there. Just like there was a certain kind of, from what I understand, from what Ivan would tell me, and like from reading up on it a bit, there was that a bit of a social rivalry, because, you know, to get to train in jiu-jitsu, you needed to buy a gi, which is expensive. But to train in luta livre, you don't. You just show up however you are. You get a pair of shorts. You don't need a shirt. Whatever kind of, you know, you just show up. And so there was that kind of social rivalry of like the barrier to entry and what it needs to what kind of economic capacity you need to participate in the sport. So there was that, and then some of the techniques, like there was luta livre's real lots of like chokes from the front headlock position, and lots of like really good for wrestlers for sure. Mm-hmm. So I picked up on it right away. I really like that style of submission grappling. But yeah, the rivalries really started in Brazil on that. And then Ivan just coming from that discipline really spread it throughout Peru. And then me training with Ivan, that's what I came up with and learned, just training through MMA, and it made a lot of sense. I mean, for MMA, you kind of want to focus on the no-gi stuff.
Right.
That's what it is.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Something as commonplace as a gi is a separator of social classes in some countries.
It is. Yeah, it is. I think I still always have this feeling of like, I don't know if I don't feel like I fully understand everything that was behind everything around the rivalry, you know, like I don't think I don't think I have like a full understanding or grasp around it, but I know that's kind of how it was explained to me. And but from my perspective, I just really enjoyed training with my team and coach, and I learned a lot of great techniques through the lucha libre discipline, and it helped me a lot in my MMA career. And but that's, I think you got to kind of go back. You got to interview some of the people involved in it to really get a deeper sense of what that was all about.
That would be fascinating, wouldn't that, to go back and understand kind of the early breakoffs? Because even like in the 80s and 90s within jiu-jitsu communities, no gi was, shunned. It was disgraceful. Even leg locks at the beginning weren't super popular. And so it's really changed a lot. Jiu-jitsu has. And so in Peru, are there lucha libre only tournaments, just like we have wrestling tournaments? Do they have that as well?
Yeah, all the time.
Wow.
Yeah, they do a big national tournament. Let's see here. I've reffed a few. I didn't compete in any because at that time I was like all in MMA.
Mm-hmm.
But it was cool. You know what? You're bringing back some memories. I reffed. I was like an honored kind of guest to hand out the medals and the trophies. And it was one of the young kids who won at that time was Claudio Puelles, who's in the UFC now. And, I helped coach, Raleigh helped a lot too. He was there.
Wow.
But I remember kind of like, giving him his medal at a Lucha Libre national tournament. And, now he's really successful in the UFC and doing great.
So is grappling, would you say, like the second most popular sport behind soccer?
I don't know. I mean, I'd say soccer is way more popular than anything else.
By a long shot.
Yeah, by like a big long shot. So, if it were to be second, it's like there's a huge difference between first and second. But I would say it did get some pretty good support nationally. Like, when I was competing, we would get, I'd be on national TV a pretty decent amount and do these kind of, get interviewed before fight or do these game shows like these gladiator challenge type things but yeah, it was well, I don't know, women's volleyball is pretty popular too. So I don't want to say like a definite second, but it was a lot more than you'd think. It definitely has a big following, and there's a good amount of people that are fans of the sport and support and like to see the sport for sure.
Well, and you and your teammates were a big part of that kind of quote unquote making history. I know that was a motto of your coach to kind of change the perception of Peru, fighters from Peru in terms of what they could do and how far they could make it. And so even though you were an American, you were, kind of an adopted Peruvian. And as Raleigh says, you can't go down the street without signing signatures. So I think that's amazing that you kind of helped amplify the grappling story there in Peru with a lot of the guys on your team.
Yeah, I feel really grateful to just be to be a part of that. That was a lot of fun. And yeah, being present for that moment in MMA history. And yeah, like I was saying before, yeah, what Riley was saying, kind of, I definitely feel love and support from all the people in Peru. So I love going back, and it's a cool experience for sure.
I bet. Now, you wrestled 285 in college, but you fought middleweight. What was the weight loss secret? How did that happen?
Oh man, I got to figure out how to try to implement that again.
Like what'd you weigh in college when you were wrestling? Because I think I watched a dual meet with you guys. Must have been your senior year, maybe. But like, what were you, like a full 285 or?
That was pretty close, 270 maybe. Yeah, wow. And I got up to definitely 285 or over. And then I dropped down to middleweight. Yeah.
What was your walking around weight when you were fighting middleweight?
Well, I'd say when I was getting it, so if I'm 2 months out from a fight before starting fight camp, if I'm under 220, I feel like, okay, things are under control. So I would try to keep myself under 220. But that wasn't every fight camp. There was times where I'm like starting heavy and it was just a lot more work. But yeah, I'd say walking around. Yeah, that would be a good walking around weight for me, is just 215, 17, right around there. That's like on target where I feel like, okay, I could go and make this weight cut.
So was that a conscious decision to go to middleweight, or did you ever consider just fighting heavyweight since that's what you were used to?
I have heavyweight fights. I have light heavyweight fights, and I have middleweight fights. But I would say I'm just I'm a better athlete for myself at middleweight, maybe light heavyweight. I was never a good 285. Like my frame isn't big enough for that. Mm-hmm. So I feel like it helped being a heavyweight at some point, just like for the strength that I gained through doing that. But yeah, I think like fighting weight, you gotta be, it's a big endurance challenge too, right? You're talking like 15 minutes or 25 minutes in a title fight.
Yeah.
And it's, it could get pretty intense. And then for a fighter like me too, like I was kind of more of a strength fighter. I probably needed to relax more to conserve energy. But, those 15 minutes could feel like a really long time in the cage. So I feel like 185, my just endurance was better.
So that was the reason why you went down. And, you had a lot of fights in Peru, eventually made it to Bellator. How much has Bellator changed since when you were there to now? Or is it a pretty similar organization?
That's a good question. Well, I wouldn't really know the kind of behind the scenes, it's been steadily growing.
Yeah.
So it's bigger platform, bigger organization than when I was competing. But I was I was competing at the time where it was on the rise for sure and already established to a pretty certain level. So, I was there during the changeover from their changeover in leadership. Bjorn Remney started it, and then Scott Coker, who started Strikeforce, took over as the president of Bellator. So I was there for that changeover. But yeah, I'd say it's steadily growing. The sport's growing overall. And yeah, I think it's nice to see. I'm more of a fan of the sport now, but I like to continue to see just opportunities for those athletes to go after their dreams and goals.
Yeah, it seems like Bellator just continued to do a great job and just growing like crazy. Obviously, they love signing wrestlers, and you were in the really in the thick of it. 2016 era, maybe a little before, a little after. And I know you fought since then, but just looking back at the Bellator fights on Sherdog, it looked like that was the era. And just want to get your thoughts on it, mainly how it had grown and changed over the years. Once you had decided to move back to the United States, how did you move into the Beat the Streets role?
Yeah, that felt like destined. I really feel like I was so grateful for that opportunity. My whole life, I followed Beat the Streets from afar, just, coming from the wrestling world, knowing what the mission and soul of the organization is, using the sport of wrestling to positively alter life's trajectory for youth that need us. And so it's something that I kind of, always wanted to get involved in, really, I was living in South America and knowing what's going on in the organization. So when they were hiring for Beat the Streets Philly, it was also at the moment where, my wife and I were talking for, I guess, a couple of years prior to that. I was just, getting our kids over here to the States and starting the next chapter of life here. And I was starting to kind of feel with MMA, I'm like, okay, this is great, but it's not going to last forever. And I kind of want to, that's where my main earnings were coming from. And I wanted to, I felt like it was time for that next chapter of life. not necessarily stop competing, but definitely kind of transition to the next chapter. And then Beat the Streets Philly was hiring, and it felt like it was just meant to be, because that's an organization that I feel like just combines everything that I'm passionate about and stand for as a person. And I just feel so honored and grateful to be a part of that team and helping move that mission forward and expand Beat the Streets programs across the country now with this new role at National, and before that with connected with all the youth in Beat the Streets Philly. There's just such inspirational kids coming through that program, inspirational leaders, coaches, and all, just really tremendous experience. And it's so, yeah, I guess when the stars kind of aligned on that front, where it made sense with what my wife and I were thinking for our family, and it made sense for just what just everything I kind of believe in. Like, it just felt like that perfect opportunity. Like, yeah, I want to join that team. That's something I could really dedicate myself to for a long time. And that's how I still feel. I started with Beat the Streets Philly in 2017. And then just recently, I'm in my first month really with Beat the Streets National, and I envision myself in this role for a really long time, and just want to help Beat the Streets grow across the country, and then eventually across the world.
I can't think of a better person to be in the role. I mean, you've been involved in these kind of social impact projects really your whole life. If you go back to even in college, you were doing the big brother, big sister. So amazing, excuse me, that you're in this role. What is Beat the Streets National?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah. So Beat the Streets National, it's a national network of all of the Beat the Streets chapter organizations. And there's 9 accredited, 2 in process right now. So really like 11 Beat the Streets organizations that are serving 37 cities, and we're counting the smaller surrounding cities as well, across the entire country. And collectively we're serving over 8,400 youth, right? And we're bringing wrestling programs into inner cities and into under-resourced communities. We're growing girls wrestling. We're using the sport as a vehicle to empower and transform lives. So that's what's really special about this organization, right? It's like it's a lot of what your podcast is all about. You're tapping into those those life lessons that exist in the sport and how it changed, how wrestling changed my life. Well, that's what Beat the Streets is all about. It's like, how do we intentionally connect those dots for our youth and realize, hey, if you can get through this tough practice, you can go and you can stick with the sport. You're going to learn how to overcome adversity. You're going to learn how to navigate challenges. You're going to learn how to bounce back from failures. You're going to learn how to wrestle through life, and you're going to take those lessons and you're going to go and do amazing things with your life. What are your goals? And we're going to, this is going to help you get to your goals. And not only that, you're going to have a sense of community and family and people to support you and be there along with you in that journey to get to those goals. So it's really about how this sport serves as a vehicle for youth development. And it's exciting. It's working. We have our Beat the Streets kids are much more likely to graduate high school than their peers. They're more likely to enroll in post-secondary education, right? They're doing better. They have that sense of family and community. They're healthier. All these positive outcomes are happening. So we're doing really, really important work. And the sport of wrestling, combined with that mentorship that you get from coaches and mentors that are volunteering, really is the vehicle to achieve that impact. And the youth themselves, like, we just have such inspirational youth in this program, and the only reason it works is because they're doing their part. They're showing up, they're sticking with it, they're going and really doing all that hard work to overcome some sometimes really difficult situations to go on and doing amazing things with their life. So I get I get inspired by the mission every time I think about it, and I get inspired by the youth that exist in our organization every time I think about just the kids that we serve. And I only know, if we're talking about on the national level, I know a lot of I know a lot of our kids, but like there's so many that I don't know, and everyone has their story and it's really amazing to think about.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, and think about this. Everyone knows how powerful wrestling is, and a lot of times, as I've heard the great Mike Powell mention, a lot of after-school youth programs, they play ping pong, they get pizza, and they go home, and they don't have that like common experience of suffering through a practice together. And so that's the beautiful thing about obviously Beat the Streets, is that it connects people through like the pain everyone goes through at a workout, and then at the end you can all reflect and crack jokes on it.
Oh, it's a total bonding experience. Yeah. And then also something to think about too, like, so I'm all for, as just like a nonprofit professional in the space and like youth, I'm all for anything that helps youth get passionate about something and work towards goals and have those, I think that can come in different forms, but I also think there's really something special about what we're doing because when you're trying to reach I think it speaks to maybe some of, it's just that adversity aspect. I think it speaks to some of the hardest to reach youth sometimes. And you need something tough like the sport of wrestling to really make that impact. And, it's something I've seen internationally too, like my time in Peru with Ivan. It's like, okay, are you going to be able to pull a kid out of a gang and get him to play ping pong and get passionate about that, or if are you gonna be able to get them, get that kid on the mat, and is that going to speak to them more? So I don't know. That's kind of anecdotally, but I feel like there's something really special about what we're doing on the as a youth development organization.
No question. I think the main thing is, when will we see Beat the Streets Lima, Peru? Is that will there be a day when that's rolled out?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say if I'm in this position for long enough, 100%. Yeah. I think we set some visionary goals that line up with the 2028 Olympics, and it's really, we're going after aggressive growth in this next chapter, and we want to grow girls wrestling by 280% by the 2020 Olympics. And we want to get to 28 new cities by the 2020 Olympics, which are going to be in Los Angeles. And, we have a really amazing Beat the Streets chapter in Los Angeles led by Yaru Washington and Andy Barth. Yeah. And the idea is we could, hit those goals and then celebrate those goals together, get Beat the Streets kids, leaders, coaches from across the country to be there present for that Olympics, celebrating getting to 28 new cities. So I'd say this initial chapter right now, mostly focused on let's get this Beat the Streets to every major city across the country. Mm-hmm. And when we accomplish that, or we're close to accomplishing that, in my mind, I'm like, well, let's get Beat the Streets to every major city across the world, because what we're doing is working, and there's a lot more kids out there that need us. So it's our responsibility to growing, not at the same, we always need to make sure that we're growing intelligently and thoughtfully about each one, so that we could really follow through on that promise. But I think, with that thoughtful approach, there's a lot more growth that should be happening, because we're as much as, we're doing an amazing job already up to this point, and in serving 8,400 youth every year, there's a lot more youth across the world that need us. So I'd love to see us meet that need.
I mean, it's so exciting to know that you guys have those goals mapped out and be able to see you grow over the next couple of years. It's been amazing. I mean, growing up, you kind of always heard about Beat the Streets, but thought it was like a New York only deal, just because they did such a phenomenal job with everything they were doing. But now, I mean, like you mentioned, LA, Philly, Chicago, really springing up. I know Cleveland's putting a lot of work in right now. Just amazing. Last question for you is, if folks want to support, in the way of like volunteerism or donations, should they contact Beat the Streets National or go to their local chapters? How does that work?
Well, both really. I think we're looking for, we'd love to see the wrestling community, rally behind, support your local efforts in your local city, and then also support this national movement, right? Because at national, we're thinking about how do we strengthen existing chapters and scale this across the country.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd really encourage supporters, if you haven't beat the streets in your local community, like absolutely get plugged in. That's where you have an opportunity to get plugged in on the ground level too, right? Like, go and meet some of the youth involved, meet some of the coaches involved, meet the leadership, and then at the national level too, like, you can come in and you can be a part of this big movement that is on the rise right now, that we're looking to get beat the streets organizations across the entire country. And I think there's a really, me as a support. So I support both, right? I support Beat the Streets Philly. I support Beat the Streets National, with my time and also donations, and just like, cause I believe in both. And I want to be a part of the journey on both sides. I want to be part of that local support, and I want to be part of that national movement. And so I think that speaks to I love the wrestling community to kind of rally behind that message, because there's so much that we can do together.
Yeah. Well, again, just very excited you guys are in the position you're in, and we look forward to Beat the Streets just amazing us each and every year. I'll link in the show notes to Beat the Streets National, and then Beat the Streets Chicago. We're a big Chicago podcast here, but love wrestlers worldwide. I was just thinking as you were talking, like, Beat the Streets Dagestan. I mean, amazing, right? That would be so cool.
Oh yeah.
And I know they pretty much are already doing that, with everything, those clubs over there. But yeah, just a lot of excitement, and I really appreciate your time coming on the show. I always enjoy talking to the Penn alum. It's awesome to see just the wrestling community in Philly is so strong. So thanks again for coming on the show, Ben. We appreciate it.
Oh, it's an honor to be here with you, Ryan. And thank you for inviting me. And really happy we had this time together. And thank you to everyone who's listening, and for this opportunity to talk about, we dove into my personal story a bit, but I really am glad that we're able to spread the message of Beat the Streets, because it's making such a big difference in the world. And yeah, thank you, Ryan. Thank you to everyone that's listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Wrestling Changed My Life. To see video clips from this interview, please go to Instagram at Wrestling Changed My Life. This episode was proudly presented by Spartan Combat. The Spartan Combat Nationals are returning to Jacksonville, Florida, April 8th through the 10th, 2022. Register now at SpartanCombat.com.